Hello, everyone. I'm Ellen Richstone, Public Company Board Director and Board Member of NACD New England Chapter. Thank you so much for joining us for this virtual program on the NACD Blue Ribbon Commission Report, Building a High Trust Board CEO Relationship. This is a joint program between NACD Minnesota and the New England chapters. I'd also like to welcome our friends in Bismarck and Fargo, North Dakota, and Mankato, Minnesota, who are also joining us today. Before we get started, we have a couple of housekeeping items. First, a reminder to remain muted throughout the program and to use the chat function to pose questions. No need to wait until the Q&A portion of the event to submit questions. We will leave time at the end of the program for your questions and get to as many as we can. Next, we know that many of you want to receive credits for this program. To receive credit, we need to know your first and last name. Please make sure that your full name is visible on your Zoom window. Please also keep in mind that our programs follow the Chatham House rules. Feel free to engage to open, honest dialogues without individual attribution. Finally, NACD and the NACD chapter network organizations are nonpartisan, nonprofit organizations dedicated to providing directors with the opportunity to discuss timely governance oversight practices. The views of the speakers and audience are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of NACD. I would be remiss if I did not thank all of our chapter sponsors. The continued loyalty of these organizations underscores the important role of NACD. It is their support that allows us to fulfill our mission of delivering world-class, director-centric, local programming, and peer-to-peer sharing of insights that is vital to advancing excellence in the boardroom. Today, we are highlighting Egon Zender and KPMG, who have continued to support our mission of excellent corporate governance. Thank you for your support. Next, I'd like to take a minute to welcome first-time attendees who are here with us today. Thank you all for joining us. We truly hope you enjoy your first program, and we hope to see you at many more. Finally, I want to thank a few key people who are instrumental in coordinating today's event. Shannon Lennon, Executive Director of the Minnesota Chapter, Deb Rosenthal, Executive Director for New England, Larissa Rivetto, Chapter Administrator for New England, and Tola Holowol, Program Management Consultant. Thank you for all your efforts bringing this program to our members. One change to our program I should mention. Jody will not be with us today because of a family emergency. She sends her regrets, and we, of course, are wishing her and her family the best. Now it is my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Steve Jennings. Steve has been a board member for public, private, and nonprofit companies for 30 years. He has held both chair and lead director roles. Currently, Steve is the lead director at Analog Devices and NomGov chair for International Workplace Group, PLC. I'm turning it over to you, Steve.
Great. Thank you, Ellen. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really terrific to have you all join us for this virtual program. And it's a combination. It's great that some of you are able to be in conference rooms together, which is terrific, as well as the people who are dialing in. I just think this is a great topic. When Ellen asked if I'd consider facilitating this topic, of all the things we do as board members, this is figuring out the relationship, a productive relationship with the CEOs. It's as important a thing as we do. And I think to have Dave and Colleen joining to chat with me about it today is really exciting. Colleen Burnell-Brown serves on the boards of public and private companies across media, technology, digital platforms, financial services, and consumer businesses. What don't you do, Colleen? She's been recognized an NAC Directorship 100 honoree. She served on the NACD Blue Ribbon Commission and is a GAMCO Hall of Fame inductee. Dave Bozeman is the president and CEO of C.H. Robinson. Dave's a member of the board of directors, as well as a member of the board of directors of 3M, the Brookings Institution, the Conservation Fund, and the board of governors from the American Red Cross. So across the three of us, you've got a combination of former CEOs, current CEOs, years and years of board service. And what we're going to talk about is the importance of the board CEO relationship. And I think what you're going to hear from all of us is when it goes well and it's a constructive relationship, it has enormous impacts for companies. And when it doesn't go as well and there are struggles, that tends to have implications as well. All of you have signed on as experienced directors will also have had experience with this. And we'll be very interested to hear your questions for us as we go through. Feel free to put those in the chat. I hope you all got a chance to read the NACD Blue Ribbon Commission report. I think it's one of these reports that's going to last for a long time because of both the importance of the topic, but the thoroughness with which it was covered and the toolkits in the back on a whole range of topics that boards and CEOs find themselves wrestling with. I think it's an incredible privilege to have one of the commissioners who helped write the report be with us today in Colleen. So we've asked her if she wouldn't mind starting with some overview remarks before we get into the conversation. So with Colleen, I'm going to hand that over to you.
Thank you, Steve. And I promised one of our Minnesota board members that I would give a shout out to Mankato. Just wanted you to know that we appreciate your first time gathering. Terrific. So on the Blue Ribbon Commission, I would let you all know that when you get the call to serve, of course, you feel like, you will serve. But I have to tell you, I felt this might be somewhat of a light subject. It's certainly qualitative, not quantitative in its approach, and I was wrong. So I will tell you it was not a light subject. It ended up being quite substantial, and I want to share a little bit of our purpose with you today. The Blue Ribbon Commission is set up to identify the most significant emerging governance challenges that boards face and to provide practical, actionable guidance for directors and CEOs who are navigating these issues. And at its core, the commission is continues to examine governance issues in depth. We don't always get the time to do that in our national summit, et cetera. And so this is a chance to really dive in. It also helps us identify governance practices that might be lagging what we're seeing out there in the business world. It also develops forward-looking recommendations that influence boardroom standards, which I think is important for us to take note of. Then it also translates increasing organizational, technological, geopolitical, all of the leadership complexities that we're facing today into hopefully practical governance guidelines for directors. The commission's role is not theoretical. It's intended to help govern in real time amid what we're all dealing with now, accelerated disruption. And boards who are currently operating, we're all experiencing this, and we certainly had many conversations about it as we worked on the Blue Ribbon Commission, but the faster strategic disruption that we are dealing with has truly driven a lot of the discussion of the Blue Ribbon Commission for this particular subject. AI technology transformation, heightened stakeholder scrutiny, increased activism. I know I've experienced that myself this year, and reputational risk, talent succession, instability, shorter tenures for our CEOs, and greater pressure for resilience, adaptability, and trust. The traditional governance frameworks are increasingly built insufficiently, was the conclusion, for the speed and complexity that our organizations are dealing with. And the Blue Ribbon Commission basically raised its hand to say, we really want to help close that gap. And what might that look like? So the most recent commission examined one of the most consequential dynamics in governance that I believe and have experienced myself. And that's the relationship between the board and the CEO. And the work recognized that the traditional model may not be built to deal with the acceleration and the iterations that are coming at us at this point. Periodic oversight is not necessarily up to what we need to be addressing in today's environment. So instead, the conversations surrounded the boards and CEOs that we are now moving forward into a greater interdependence between strategy, the board, and management. There's faster decision cycles, there's greater transparency needed, and there's expanded expectations around succession, culture, innovation, and crisis leadership. The commission did explore how boards can maintain appropriate independence while becoming more strategically engaged. That was a lengthy conversation because we all know the nose in, fingers out, but there's a little more pressure to have more nose in and the more discipline to have fingers out. So not crossing into management, but supporting without overreaching, challenging without destabilizing what the strategy is, and building trust while preserving authenticity. I would say that there were 4 emerging themes that I walked away with, and I've had the fortune of speaking on panels now for the Blue Ribbon Commission this is my 6th chapter meeting, so thank you for having me. The key emerging themes: governance must be more adaptive. Static governance models are no longer adequate, and I likened it to governance is no longer a structure, but in my head it's a system, and we need to think of governance systematically. CEO success is increasingly a board responsibility. I think in the past, it was left more up to the CEO to perform and to deliver. And I think we all now have a stake in saying, your success is our success. How do we help you be successful? The third, and probably most talked about, and I'm sure we'll get to today, is on trust. And it's becoming a governance imperative, and actually a governance imperative, but I would say a strategic asset. If you have trust between your CEO and your board, you're higher functioning and arguably more competitive and more able to navigate the changes in the world that we're dealing with. So a competitive asset. And then future boards are going to look different. The next generation of directors will require broader expertise, greater technological flexibility and fluency, higher adaptability, and stronger collaborative leadership skills. And that pressure is going to increase. So in closing, the Blue Ribbon Commission helps boards move from reactive to anticipatory in our conclusion on this particular subject. And its work is ultimately about preparing directors and CEOs not simply to govern in today's organizations, but to govern effectively with the realities of this acceleration, transparency, complexity, and building for the future. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Steve.
Awesome. Thanks, Colleen. That was great. So those of you who've had a chance to look at the report, which I hope everyone does get a chance, will see that it's built in 3 sections. There's a section on building the trust foundation. Then there's a section on operationalizing the trust. And the third section is leveraging the trust for strategic impact. So I thought what we do is the 3 of us explore each of those themes in turn. And Dave, I thought we could dive right in because you've had the benefit here of having gone through a search process and joined 3+ years ago now. And I thought it'd be useful to have you talk a little bit about how, even starting in the interview process and things, you thought about building a trust rapport with Jody and the board members, which you could then carry into your tenure as CEO.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. First of all, happy to be here. It's an honor to sit here with you, Colleen, and Steve, to go through this topic. And I thought, by the way, Colleen, that report was very well done. A lot of calories burned to get that accomplished. So I appreciate that, and it hit on a lot of great points. And Ellen, thanks for opening up as well. Steve, if I think about the search process, it does hit to trust, and we're gonna dive and double click on that as well. But it was super important. I thought Jody and the board were very intentional about their search. Now, I might want to frame this a little bit for everyone watching here, as I'm Jody's not here. But we have a great relationship. I'll try to represent both of us here. The framing at that point is we had an activist that was in the company, in the stock, and actually on the board with 2 seats, really 3 seats, and myself coming in, I was not the choice of the activist, and so I'm framing all of this so the audience can get a feel for the pressure, not only of myself coming in, but the board and certainly the chair, and what Jody had to navigate as well. And so they were very intentional about what they wanted, and that was a new leader that could communicate, transform, really kind of drive the organization into a different direction. And it was somewhat of a risk because in the logistics industry, you would expect someone that would come that has just like been in the industry, and mine was a little bit different, heavy industrials, with the background of the companies you've had, Harley and Caterpillar and Ford, Amazon with technology. So it was a little bit different of bringing technology and industrials into this mix. But that's what the board wanted. They made the call, and I could tell you it wasn't with the activists. It wasn't just friction free. So trust was super important to start off with, and that's how we kind of started our journey. I treated the activists like any other investor and any other director, and I think we started off on a pretty good foot, but it was not friction free. We could double click a lot of that, but I wanted to at least let the framing sit there on what Jody had to deal with, what I had to deal with as we started down this path.
The activist thing, Colleen, it'd be interesting in your action, because it's interesting. We've all dealt with this. My first big board experience had a major activist. It was definitely not friction free. And I would say the big part of my role as chair in that situation was scrambling to maintain the trust, particularly between the CEO, who was saying, look, I have a fiduciary duty, yes, to maximize shareholder value, but I've got a lot of stakeholders. This is the long-term play. I'm very frustrated with these guys just trying to get out, and the pressure they're imposing on that. I'm curious, Colleen, both from your experience, but also from the report, about how the rise of activism, what impact that's had in this whole topic of creating trust between the boards and CEOs, and what you've seen.
Well, anytime you have scrutiny and criticism, it creates an additional amount of conversation, communication, and a very important need for trust and support from the board. One of the stats from the report was in the low 30s that the CEO claimed they felt the board had their back. And that was one stat that really disturbed me, because how lonely is that to be a CEO thinking that? I never felt like I was in that position. I would have said it was 70% had my back and 30 who didn't. As a CEO, well, I had some adjutant board seats. But I do think that the conversation and the communication has to begin well before you get an adjutant in your stock. You have to create a relationship that is, even if it's new, trust, but maybe you verify as a board, rather than distrust and put more pressure on that new CEO. Or my favorite game of a director, playing gotcha, and or creating even more friction than is necessary because of what is being discussed in the boardroom. And they can do that. They can, if you have an adjutant in the boardroom and they go off and take a side tangent out of the room, it creates friction. That's just one simple example of it. So my own experience with, I was a CEO with lots of adjutants in my stock, lots of over the time that I was there. And, it's not always the worst thing, as Dave talked about, to treat them like any other stockholder with great respect and candor. And I will say, ultimately, as difficult as it was for me to be dealing with a proxy contest, it seemed like every time I turned around, ultimately, we made all the right decisions in hindsight, which is not always easy to say, but we did. We took the stock from $8 to $52 before we sold, rather than bailing at $10 when they wanted us to. And secondarily, I was ultimately put in the Hall of Fame by the biggest investor, who insisted that we sell at $10 rather than the 52. And I was put in his Hall of Fame specifically for generating the greatest shareholder value of that year for his investors. And I throw that out because now he's a friend. It's a weird world, but now he's a friend. So, it isn't the worst thing to have folks in your stock that speak up. And I try to treat it that way. And I think more and more you're seeing that as the case, as almost everybody is being disrupted or agitated, or, adjutants, or even proxy contests all the way through, that make it difficult to do your job as a CEO and as a board.
Yeah, I agree with that, Colleen. One of the things, Steve, is coming in, and I had to. CEOs and boards have this kind of fork in the road that they're gonna have to deal with. I call it these diamond point moments. And my diamond point moment was really, as you come in, board members, and I try to do this as I sit on the board that I sit on as well, have to be conscious, but they're humans, right? And it's they have to be conscious about these diamond point moments of when management needs that time to run and ideate and do what it has to do, versus them coming in saying that, I have to save this, right? I have to be the one to fix this. And I ain't coming in. I had one of those moments where it was like, hey, listen, and Jody respected that. Said, I'm not your person if it's me coming in and then executing on the will of the board or the activists and just go out and do this, sell this, buy that, change that. That's not how I operate. I diagnose, I evaluate, I use data, and then I'm going to come back and I will be mature enough to represent my shareholders as well as the company. And the board needs to have a maturation timeline to be able to do that with me. And I think we had that diamond point conversation, and ultimately made the right calls versus the wrong calls, similar to you, Colleen. And I'm proud to see the turnaround that has happened at Robinson. Now the activists got out of the stock at a number that was way low than what we had, but that was their choice. But I think you just have to have that if we're having this conversation, and that leads to trust in these kind of break-off moments.
It is an interesting that notion of the diamond moment's interesting, Dave, because I think about my introduction to this. You had a very similar thing where in this case, one of the private equity firms really wanted the CEO to. We were executing a model change in a software firm, and so the financials were kind of a mess, and that takes several years to work through. It's just the reality of how it works. And they were in such an urgent. They were so urgent about getting out, partially because it was the last deal in a big fund. It was the last big deal in that fund. So they really wanted to close the fund out and move on. And we had I didn't have the language you just had for it, which is say, no, we've got to give the CEO a chance to do this. You're going to make so much more money. We need more time to do this. But it was tense for multiple years of, okay, now we can do it. Now we can do it. It's like, oh, I didn't do that if I were you. And of course, they walked away with dramatically more money as a result of being patient, much like with Colleen. I do see the activists, though, as essentially an extreme version of the pressure board members are feeling generally, because of competitive dynamics, because of how quickly things get evaluated in the world. And there is this pressure of the performance. If performance lags at all, there's a pressure we need to fix things quickly. So I'm kind of interested, Dave, have you kind of settled on some language of the board for these switch point moments that now the activists are out, but if you got a kind of rhythm of this is one of these moments, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, the way I think about it is, and Jody knows this, if she was here, she would, I think she would agree with me, is I'm pretty straightforward with the board. And this is something that I would just tell you. We had a conversation on our board that when I addressed them, I said, hey, listen, there's two different CEOs you can have, right? You could have a CEO who comes in and follows all, they're going to do everything that they're supposed to do and give you the information that you need as a board member to do that. And that can happen. Or there's a CEO that could be a bit more progressive. They can open up their brain, let the board see the art of the possible, what you're thinking about, things that are going on, looking around corners, which I think, by the way, is happening right now in society where we are. This is a different time than, say, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. I mean, things are moving at breakneck speed. And I said, hey, we should decide as a board, like, how do we want to do that? Which CEO do you want? And of course, my board said that one, that we want the progression. We want to look around corners. Now, in order to do that, all the people watching this, the easy part is saying that one. The hard part is following with a maturity scope that says when you do that, then management is going to ideate. Ideate is imperfect. Things are going to break. You're going to throw things out there. As a board, you're going to have to keep it within the scope, and the intention of things by really understanding kind of that ideation of where it's going. And we had that conversation. That's why I like the dynamics. They're not going to go perfect at times, but you do have to, as a board member, be intentional and bring yourself back and say, let's see the kind of true north of where we're going here. And we had that kind of conversation. And the last thing is I introduced more of a 3 horizon language, horizons 1, 2, and 3 from a strategy perspective. I thought the board was, as I told management when I took over, it's like, look, the board right now is the rabbit and you are the dogs on the race. You really need to flip that. You need to be the rabbit and the board can kind of go with you. That's how it should work. Moving the board into really strong strategy lanes where they can use their expertise to help the company and not using their expertise to help manage the company. We have to switch that. And I think we did a good job, Jody and I, navigating and moving the board up the ladder on the strategy lanes, moving management back to, take out the handkerchiefs and the violins, stop feeling bad about yourself, get back into your swim lane on where you have to go, and then everyone start moving forward. So there's a lot to throw at you, but it's all part of that transformation.
Well, it's great. And we got a question. I'd love to get your reaction, Colin, the question in the chat, which I think is a really interesting and building on your diamond point moments idea, Dave. If you're considering a new CEO, Colleen, what would you say that we saw as the leading practices for giving the CEO, like someone in Dave's spot, time to find his space and take directions versus, especially if there's any kind of change in strategy, versus drift and not moving fast enough? How do you think about that balance, whether it's the 100 days or however you want to frame it?
Yeah, I believe that having clarity on first things first with your board is the most important thing you can do, whether or not you actually physically write a 100-day plan or a 6-month plan, but agreement. So you can refer to this third-party kind of document or this, past conversation where you say first things first, because I guarantee you every director has a variety of different ways you want to approach a problem. And it isn't always the way you as a CEO want to approach it, because you, who know, being a CEO, understand that certain things have to come first, or whatever you do in this area is not going to make a difference. And so understanding the timing, understanding the rollout, understanding the buy-in, and understanding how these things all fit together are critical to success, especially in the first 100 days. I actually think 100 days, it's really quite short in the world of it. But in that 100 days, the thing that I told my board, the 2 boards I was CEO for, that I'm going to ask 5 questions. And I didn't make this up. This was something that came out of Jim Citron's book, if you know him from Spencer Stewart. He wrote the book, You're in Charge Now What? And these are my takeaways. I'm sure others could take away other things, but you ask these questions. The first is, what's working around here? So you don't assume, go in and have conversations with as many employees as you can. And the second is what isn't working. Usually they go there quite quickly, by the way. A third is, and this is a nuance, but well, okay, what would you do if you were king for a day? What big decision would you make? The third is, what are you afraid I'm going to do? Which by then you're into the conversation by about 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and they are relaxed enough to say, well, I'm worried you're going to cut benefits, or I'm worried you're going to, sell this asset or whatever. But it gets things on the table. And then the last one I ask is, who do you most respect? And they say, well, you mean in the company? And I said, no, well, it doesn't matter. In the company, in the world, whatever. I mean, and some would say, some distant figure that we can philosophically talk about, which has its own benefit, or someone will say, somebody in the company, which creates a great conversation. And it's more informative to me on who they don't say. But having that agreement with my board that I'm going to be gathering information, I'm going to be moving quickly once I gather it, and we're going to be implementing as fast as possible in the first things first is a standard that I think is important.
Yeah, I plus one to that and just add a couple of things here is that, like, one of the things I would expect my board to do, and Steve, what I went out is I wanted to diagnose the company. Just that's part of a lean concept of really examining the company, see how healthy it was, and did that in an organized fashion. But then coming back and sharing that diagnosis with the board, and of course with the company as well, and being radically transparent with that diagnosis. And that's what I did. And as a board member, what I would look is I would give that grace to a CEO. So, but you're looking for the organization, as Colleen was saying, do they have an organized plan on going in and doing that diagnosis? I'm looking for things like, one of the things we had to change is go from being a problem admirer company to a problem fixer. So we don't, we admire problems like most companies do, by the way, but we need to shift that. No more admiring problems. We're going to fix problems. And I also put that on the board as well. Like we can't be a problem admirer board. We need to be a problem solver board, but do that in a certain way. And you guys should hold me accountable for that.
Dave, on that note, it reminds me of the director once said to me, I'm not a shit on you director. And I went, what? I don't should you to death. And it was like, okay, I get that. That's great. And a lot of directors want to do that. They want to tell you what to do rather than ask you questions.
Yeah, exactly.
There's one other topic just before we shift gears a little bit, which is in the report, which I think is also interesting because for about half the companies out there, this is an issue, which is if you have a combined CEO and chair, what role does the lead independent director play? And how does that change some of this negotiation or discussion? I've had the privilege of both serving and having been a couple of times, including now, a lead director where there is a combined chair and CEO. And I think my own observations would be that all the things we're talking about almost get on hyperspeed then, because the CEO at any given time in that boardroom is both the CEO and the chair. They're trying to manage the board members, they're managing the board dynamics, but they've got their own team members there. They're representing the company. They've got to wear those two hats, and clarity on how we're going to communicate, what the trust is going to be, creating space for the CEO to be the CEO in the room and try to run interference on some of the chair things, both in the room and outside the room. I think create even more pressure. And since this is always a kind of back and forth, is it a good thing to have a separate chair or CEO? And I expect we're going to argue about this for the rest of the time. It is another thing to think about in this dynamic, which is to add some level of complexity, and does mean that some of the tools that are in this report, I think, are very helpful for laying out the groundwork for moving forward.
Steve,
yeah,
I can make a comment on that.
Yeah.
I've done it both ways. I was a CEO with my chair separate from me, and I was a CEO as chair. And I will tell you that I thought I wanted, when I was CEO and I had a chair separate, I thought I wanted that combination because I think ego was talking more than anything.
Yeah.
But once I got it, I realized how often I'm conflicted. And I actually preferred it the other way because it was just too easy to be conflicted and not necessarily have the buy-in from the entire board because you look conflicted.
Yeah. I would certainly say that my experience, both in serving the role and also my experience of serving boards and being boardrooms, the most successful variants really free up the CEO, combo CEO and chair to be the CEO in the boardroom. And the lead director really tries to help so they can really be that job. I think it's a very hard thing in that moment to do both. I just think it's doable, but it's you have to remember which hat are you wearing, the green hat or your blue hat sort of thing. Which is
I think it comes down to, again, the awareness and maturity of the board members. You have to be purposeful and conscious about it. On my 3M board, we have a lead director, and Jim Federling does a really nice job with Bill, but it's a very mature board.
Yeah.
And that works. But communication is like super important. Just like it is now, Jody and I have strong communications, and you just have to double down on that and not let yourself get kind of intellectually lazy, if that makes sense, as a board member.
True.
You have to stay pretty sharp.
So that's a really good. So I think just mindful of making sure we cover all the topics. Unless, Ellen, you tell me there's some pressing question out of this first section. I've been watching the chat. Several of the questions are actually in the next section. I'd like to go from this notion of, okay, I've built some foundation of trust now. Now, how do we make it mechanically work? Like, what are some of the things we do? And you just teed off, you just started this conversation, Dave, because you just said, well, it's all about communication. So what kind of rhythms have you set up for communicating with the board, inside the board, outside the board, conversation with the like frequency? How do you decide what to do? And I asked you the same thing, calling to your experience to maximize the trust and the impact.
Yeah, I think this is a key one for a CEO and board members, because it's not static, Steve. I mean, you can't, as for example, 3 years ago, as I took the seat, we were on a turnaround in what we had to do. That means you're going to have communications that are more frequent, different mechanisms, driving trust and comfort with the board as you go along. And so I was sending out monthly board letters. I put a mechanism in place that I would meet for 15 minutes, 15, 20 minutes with every director on Monday. And, each board meeting starts on Wednesday. They would have the materials already. That was simply an intimate one-on-one meeting. They could pass. It could be 5 minutes, or they could take the 15 minutes, but no more. And that was just to give me, if you had a hot issue going into the board, we would have that one-on-one time to kind of like deal with that. But the actual writings of the letters for the board, and then the pre-board letter and post-board letter, it's some work, but that I had to do as we were kind of going through the time that we were going through. Now I was able to kind of back off some of that rhythm, deprecate some of those mechanisms, but don't lose the fact that the board still likes to hear from you on what's going on. And so I've implemented things like office hours, but not on a predictive rhythm perspective, because that's just a small board meeting. So I'll do it if the cup fills up. I'll say, hey, I've got a number of things. I want to do an office hour. Whoever can make it. But you just do those type of mechanisms just to allow the board and the CEO a connection. That's what I do as a CEO, and that's how I would respect it as a board member.
Yeah, I think that when you're a new CEO, you have to be extremely intentional, and you have to have more frequent communication and transparent communication. So you have to make a greater effort, whether or not that is in person over lunch or a telephone call, but you need to work it, and you need to make it matter, and you need to have an open ear as a CEO to be listening to the input that the director wants to share. And I think the hardest thing about this is the director wants to contact, but they don't want to be punching a clock or checking a box. That's just, nobody wants to waste time that way. The second thing is that changed for me over the years was switching to being a CEO who did a 45 minutes to an hour executive session with just the CEO and the board as we started the meeting. And that gave me a chance to really talk through what was of concern and to make sure everybody was on the same playing field, because inevitably you'd had one or two calls the day before with just one or two directors, and they had more information than the other directors. And so it felt very uncomfortable to me going into a boardroom, not setting the table with everybody having the same information, and or stuff that would end up being brought up in the executive session at the end would seem kind of gratuitous. It should have been brought up in the beginning, and we wouldn't have wasted all this consternation on whatever the issue was. So I think that was helpful. And then the other thing is understanding who you're dealing with, a board and a CEO, understanding where you fit, meaning a lot of work when you bring on some new CEOs is in the succession work you do, a tremendous amount of onboarding work. You identify, not for judgment, but to understand what you're dealing with as far as how they make decisions, what their preferable way to work is. And all of the big recruiting firms offer this kind of effectiveness or process of onboarding. And sometimes they last as long as 2 years, but there's a way to measure progress, and we can talk about that, which I believe then puts on the table real traction on helping the CEO settle in and helping the CEO be effective and helping the board manage their expectations.
Yeah, I think it's David.
Yeah, I was going to say, totally agree. The only thing I would add on that is the board dinners, which are just with the CEO and the board when they come in. Sometimes you change it if you have management and exposure of management to the board. But typically, as they come in, they'll have a dinner with the CEO. What I've changed, those have really become de facto executive sessions. No CEO eats at those things. They can tell you that they do, but they typically don't, because they're talking to the board. And it's very, very, I'm trying to make it as informal as possible, but as transparent as possible. And then picking up the next day, as Colleen said, we'll have the standard executive session and kind of go through. One of the things I thought was helpful, Steve, was doing a series recap, just like you do on a streaming service. Like, we were here in November at this meeting. This is what we went over. And now we're here and this is where we're going. You would think that would be a small thing, but that's a pretty big thing. And directors like it. It kind of resets their mind. They might be on various boards and they're coming in. So I try to do that and get them back in the game that way.
That reminds me of one of my boards years ago. The outside board members would get together for dinner without the CEO every night. And I joined the board. And of course, we'd get into everyone would get all spooled up about things. And we get into the board meeting the next day. And the CEO would say, "Oh, you don't really understand. That's not true." And so I said, maybe the CEO should join us for dinner. That might be a helpful, could save us all a lot of time. I do think, what my general answer on this, and I'm sure is as the individuals listening to this think about their boards, there is a little horses for courses here. You have to figure out what's going to work for one's particular board situation. But you've identified some things that certainly in my experience are really helpful. So one is that time alone with the CEO, with the outside board members, no management team, just the CEO. Dinner is a great way to do it. The hour, sometimes as much as 2 hours at the start of a board meeting, where the CEO just talks about what's going on. It's where we were before. Here's what I'm seeing. Here's the things we're wrestling with. Everyone gets asked questions. It gets everyone level set. If there are major issues in between, or just sometimes just be, I've interacted with boards where the CEO just says, "Hey, once a quarter, I'm getting on the phone for an hour. I'm not sending any slides. I'm just going to get on and tell you what's going on right now and answer any questions you have. Anybody wants to join in? Great. It's going to last an hour." Not surprisingly, over time, everybody wants to show up. Short missives. I think, are another a way to do this. All these things are ways to keep board members engaged and connected and thinking that finding ways that they can be helpful, because the recap makes a lot of sense, because even the most committed board members not living the business every day like the CEO and the management team are, just the reality of the business.
Steve, when we do these things, not everything goes great. Colleen knows that. She's forgotten more about this stuff than a lot of people would know. I mean, there's some things that go sideways. And I would say for everyone watching this is, vulnerability is important. I'm big on that. And just to be vulnerable here is like one of the things you have to manage. And if Jody was here, we would talk about this, because we both agree. Your chair or your lead director and the CEO, you need to be conscious about reading the room and who says what, because you'll find that anyone watching this, and you might do it yourself, 11 different personalities or 12 or 10, however many you have, when you toss something out at that dinner or that executive session and you say, hey, Dave, you should do, for some directors, that line in the concrete cures. And for others, you get to, and the CEO could hear it as, all right, that's a good suggestion, right? And then you let that cure, and next thing you know, that director might say, hey, I thought we told you not to do X, right? And so I think everyone on here, this is just about hearing things, summarizing them, and saying, let's go back to, what was some of the feedback that was given? What were some of the things that we really want to double click on? And by the way, what swim lanes are where, from a role and responsibility perspective? That's super important for everyone. And it's probably the hardest dynamic of board members who are watching this right now, and management and CEOs, and independent directors and chairs, to make sure you drive that home.
On that note, Dave, one of the things that really crossed my mind as a CEO was watching a director, a member of my board, take on inappropriately, in the circumstance, one of my direct reports. Ugh. Whether or not it's to embarrass him or to condescend, or play gotcha, and I've witnessed this and watched some of my CEOs cringe at a director asking a question that's belittling. Like, no, you think we don't keep track of our competitors? I mean, they don't say it, but it's very demotivating, very demotivating. And so I spend a lot of time now watching my directors, my boards, especially as governance, but certainly as a chair, and seeing how they ask their questions, because we should be able to ask anything we need to ask, but it's how will they do it, the tone in which they do it, how they preface it. Yeah, that matters a lot in order for, in some ways you got to think about, management could be judging the board too.
That's right.
So this builds, there are different ways. I'd love to ask you both about executive sessions, and I'd like to then talk about board evaluation, because I think it's a very useful tool for the problem you were just talking about. Just quickly, how do you both view kind of best practice on executive sessions and getting feedback from executive sessions and that sort of stuff? And that's executive sessions without the CEO. So with the outside, what are you doing, Dave?
Well, the way I would do it, this will be at the end of the board meeting, because again, I do the dinner to start, and the start of the actual board meeting is an executive session, and then at the end is really the executive session, really without the CEO, except for what Jody and I do, and I think it works well, and I hope most people can experience this. We go around at the end of the meeting, and all I do is pull out a notebook, and I'm in listen mode, and we call on each director, to break away the group consensus thing. Like, what is your feedback to the CEO for the meeting itself? And that's not one where I should debate that feedback. I'm just going to take that feedback in, and I write it all down. I appreciate it, and we kind of sum up the meeting. And then I exit out, but at least I have clarity on what they're thinking, and then they have their closed door exec session. That's how I kind of finish up the meeting.
Yeah, inevitably, you get into conversations in executive session without the CEO, and the directors and the remainder in the boardroom go down a rabbit hole. It happens all the time.
Yep.
And it used to drive me crazy as a CEO. I finally let that go. But as a director, when I see that happening, I regret that we don't have the CEO in the room, because there's nothing that they couldn't hear. So that practice that Dave talked about is exactly the way to scrape the most important things off the table, and hear from each director what their observations are, what their comments back are. And then when you do all of that and the CEO leaves the room, you really have cleared the air on pretty much anything anybody wants to bring up.
Yeah, certainly that's my experience. And then the good discipline I've had on the boards I've been on and lead director is going back to the CEO and saying, okay, I know we more often than not, the topic we talk about in executive session was talked about in the board. It's just something else has come out, or it's come out a little more sharply, or there's some concern that may have just gotten a little bit lost, particularly if there's an executive, if the executive team was in the room. I think it is a good opportunity to go back to the CEO and say, okay, I know I think you probably heard X, but I heard Y and Z as well in the executive session. Let's chat about that. Do you have any concerns about that? So it's a good feedback loop, because so much of the board meeting tends to have at least one or more of the low ones in the room, sometimes L2s and L3s. Just to be polite and disciplined as a director, you want to be thoughtful about how you engage and how hard you push. So I think it does create an interesting opportunity to loop back, and especially if you know it happens all the time, it's just part of the rhythm. The other thing that I also have found as a lead director, particularly the chair and CEO thing, is I try to meet every one of the outside directors for a half an hour call between every board meeting. I just try to take that off the chair and CEOs. So if they want to meet in person, I will. If not, we'll just go on the phone. And the topic is what do you think about the board meeting? What's in your mind? What would you see? What would you like to see next time? Anything you're worried about? Anything on your mind? I can synthesize that, play that back to the CEO as we set the agenda for the next meeting.
That's great.
And it keeps a rhythm for everybody to do this, to make sure their issues are getting addressed. We got a bunch of questions, and the report talks about this. I'm a big proponent of this, but I'm curious, how do you think about doing board evaluations?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Colleen.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I've done a lot of these as a non-gov chair, particularly leading the effort and even trying to perfect it as recently as 3 months ago. So what I would like to say is, in general, we're too nice to each other. And we need to find a way to create a finer point when you do board evaluations. And so we played with it. I played with it on different boards, and certainly worked with experts, third parties. And every once in a while, I think every couple of years, it's good to get a third party, and more in the effectiveness category than in the board peer review category. But I believe that some of the best advancements I'm seeing in this area is take a look at your matrix, ask individuals when they're doing the review to say, who do you go to? You get 3, who do you go to for these criteria? And then when that's all comes back in, you actually are looking at sort of the gravitas of in the center of what's going on your board, especially as non-gov chair, where your holes really are, right? And if you've got a CFO on your board who no one is going to or looking to on the board as potentially an audit chair, you have to say, okay, why would that be? And so from my perspective as non-gov, I'm looking for strengths and weaknesses on the board. I'm looking for opportunities to shore that up, and I'm looking for developmental opportunities to profile somebody's skill sets. So I believe in doing a better job using the matrix. I believe in putting a little more meat into those conversations than just everybody checks it off and we're pretty much the same score every year. So there's nothing more you need to do. There's so much to be done in this. We just did an effectiveness study on one of my boards, and I think it wasn't complete because it was not us. It was us not talking to each other. You know, it was a third party telling us what we said, and it kind of was undermining trust. And so it's not perfect to do the work, but it is pretty informative to use some of their tools to do the work so that you actually do stimulate conversation and have a board meeting that is, or board contribution that is actually meaningful and not performative.
Yeah, I think on this one, Steve, real quick. First of all, Colleen cut a lot of grass there. That covers most of it. The only thing I would add to that is we go back and forth. We just had this debate. If you have a really strong gov chair, nom and gov chair, and I think we do. There could be the debate is this, and I'm all for debate, like intellectual debate, but I think this is a good side of the debate, is that nom and gov chair actually knows the issues, the context of what's happening. So as an internal interviewer of the board, they can get more rich substance out. A third party would be right, but they could be dead right, right? I mean, it would be a bit tinsel. They wouldn't know, where to like double click on some things. And so, but that nom and gov chair has to know then they're in it, because it's a lot of work, right? It's hours and hours of work to be able to do that, every couple of years. And if they're going to do that, then it could be very rich. That would be one thing. The second one that I think all directors listening right now have to do is hold up a mirror, because I think all boards have to look and say, when you put your actual skills that you are, you can pull up any board and they put all the circles around, and I think we've got to start all looking and saying, okay, if you traveled to Europe as a director in your experience for a few times and you engaged with some things, that doesn't exactly make you an expert on M&A and what you're doing. So what I'm getting there is like having that extra push on what are the true skills of putting down is like super important, because you'll look up, because it's pride, right? And pride can drive trust or non-trust. And I think as directors, we have to like really look and say, what skills do you have? And I think the most binary, obviously, is the financial experts. But outside of that, you start getting into some gray areas of where people think that they're strong, and they may not be. And I think a good nom and gov chair has to call that out.
Yeah, see, I think you both have hit on a whole bunch of things. The only thing, the way I would synthesize this is the best processes I've seen do periodically get outside help. But then it's really important for the lead director, the nom-gov chair, to have these clear relationships and clear engagement, direct individually with the board members. It's a really good idea to regularly do the skills assessment, so you're sure that the board is actually reflective of the needs of the company going forward and where it's trying to head, as well as where it is today. Some combination of just, are we effective as a group? But then the ones that I've found have been most helpful, the open-ended, how do the other board members think I'm doing, and how do they each other think they're doing? What do they think they do well? What do they think they do badly? Which is essentially a variant calling of who do I go to? I have found in my board experiences over the years, it creates one of the problems we have is you have a bunch of type A overachievers who haven't been evaluated in a long time. And so it feels a little uncomfortable. But once people get over it, it's like, well, actually, they all really want to be good board members. They want the company to be successful. They want to be contributing. And so it creates the foundation for constructive feedback. I also think it has a great benefit of running some interference on bad behaviors. So it's a way to say, I know you may be thinking that these contributions are helpful, but actually you're shutting down conversation in the room, or your other board colleagues have noticed that you're being inappropriate. You're not handling questions the right way with L2s in the room. It's a data-driven way to engage in ways that are not always easy. And it also lets the CEO not have to deal with it and let the chair and the nom-gov and the lead director have to deal with it rather than the CEO, because the CEO's got to run the business and run the team and things. So, all right. So I'm mindful that I'm still watching the chat, Ellen, but I think we can get to some of the questions after. I am interested in the last section of the study, the report, which I thought was really helpful, was, okay, it's great. You've all done this. You've got on this. You've set up these wonderful protocols. You've got good engagement. Now, how do you drive it? How does this result drive the business differently? And you've both been in turnaround situations, that sort of stuff. And Dave, I'll go to you first, because you're clearly, if we're brought into a kind of tech-enabled transformation in a business that where you're coming from outside, like how did the board help you think about that, support you in what you were trying to do? Like, how does the configuration, that board CEO dynamic, make it easier or harder to do that? And I'm calling the same question for you after.
Yeah, no, I think it's a lot of companies are going to face this with AI and everything that's going on here. I would start by saying this is one, you have to get past the feelings really quickly. Like, I mean, because just bad pride can just allow us to admire things and spin, and we just don't have. I don't think anyone has time to do that. And so from a technology perspective, one of the things I think a lot of boards are going to have to face is the speed of change that's happening. If I look at Robinson, for example, and bringing in clock speed, when I first started and said that's a technology term, and doing that, you're into a Midwestern industrial company, now you're going from literally a year is a month is a week is a day, and a day is an hour. That's the speed change that we're kind of dealing with and doing it. And the culture has kind of shifted to that as we drive that. When it comes to a board, the governance of the board can get disconnected, from the speed of where the company's changing. And I think the board and the CEO have to manage that. So, we can walk into our next board meeting and we look up and we're like shooting through, and the directors can say, hey, wait a minute, what about that issue? And it can feel like a one-on-one issue, and you're on 303. It's not the director's fault in a sense. It's that you have to kind of keep them going along. And so one of the things I introduced was the master classes, right, within the board. And so we do this whole thing around master classes where we give a very deep, dive deep type of in-depth probe, say on generative AI or agentic AI and things that we're going with. And it's for directors to walk out of there and grab their chin, and they see the materials and they say, wow, that was as deep as you're going to get from any institution that you have. But it allows them to be able to be in the game in dealing with technology and not be dislocated from the time ideation thing. And then we also
do you do that in the board or outside the board or both?
We do that in the board, and where we place it is we actually, and Jody helped drive this too. We actually stood up a technology subcommittee, and we're evaluating whether this is full. But so it's a technology subcommittee, and that will be a subcommittee of the audit committee. And so we actually kind of drive that. But every director can come to that and see that. But it allows the directors to really get an in-depth view on technology and where we're going. And then you have to substitute that. That's the belt, and then the suspenders are the communications that I have to do with the board to kind of keep them up to speed and kind of drive them. That's how we would look at that. But I think everyone's going to have to deal with this dislocation, because this is like moving really, really fast. This is not like you drop in and just pick it back up. I mean, these things are going super fast in these companies.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I was going to say, Colleen, you.
Yeah, a couple of things. I chaired an innovation and technology committee, which is the fourth committee of a publicly traded board, and I was the second chair of that committee. So it had been well established, and because of the kind of need the company had, we spent almost all our time on technology. Right, rarely talked about innovation. During COVID, we ended up with a situation where there was no more technology conversation, right? We weren't doing anything in technology because everything was just trying to keep the lights on, trying to go remote, trying to, technology was doing what it had to do. But anyway, I suggested to the committee and ultimately the whole board then that we do a stretch, what we ended up calling a sprint on innovation, and brought in a third party to teach what is innovation and how uniquely innovation manifests for you as an individual, and ways you can discover that you're innovating and don't even realize it, and way to be curious and bring it without being a fool in the boardroom, to be curious and raise these questions. And they created the whole process. We went through it all. And as a result, after we went through that whole program, we were all much more transparent with what innovation meant to the company and how it could not only disrupt, but also consume us if we didn't, start early or bite it off a piece at a time. And so we had better ability to discuss it because we now had a common language. We now had some perspective on how we thought about this stuff. And so that's one thing I thought that was extremely useful. Another thing that I've talked about in the past is one of my boards instituted the Bulls and the Bears. And so whenever there was a tough discussion about difference of opinion, a technology rollout, an acquisition, we literally in the boardroom, the dreaded hat, we pulled bull or bear out of it. You took 20 minutes, went to your corners, came back as a team, and you argued for the bull and the bear. And I'll tell you, as somebody who's typically a bull, I hated being the bear because it's just not in my brain, and it made my brain flip around. And suddenly, as a result, and I wasn't the only one who had to wear the other hat, you got closer to what was real, right? What the risk could be, what the risk couldn't be. And the CEO and management team heard the board, some of the best minds on the subject, arguing both ways. And so they could walk away with better information than otherwise they would have had. And as a board, I think we were much more informed on the decision we were all about to make, because we were more honest about the pros and the cons of doing whatever it was we were going to do.
It's interesting to hear you both talk, because over my now 45-year career of consulting and being in boardrooms and being a board chair and that sort of thing, where you started, Dave, with the pace, the relentlessness is the thing that's most overwhelming to me. It's just so much quicker, and there's just less time for deliberation, and the information flows are so much faster. That has just been a constant, and I think it puts a really big burden on the people on this call who want to be good board members to be prepared. So, and really, really do your work, not just reading the board book, but I love the idea of master classes. The kinds of things that we tend to do is have both inside and outside. First of all, we're asking all the board members, every board member to report, every board meeting report back. What did you do to learn more as a board member in the last quarter? Did you go to a great NACD event? I'm gonna have to pitch the NACD for you, Ellen. But did you do something? What else did you do to go learn? Then every board meeting will tend to have either a technology deep dive, as you might imagine, with the global semiconductor company. There are geopolitical issues. There'll be, it'll be authors, be political experts. There's someone coming into the boardroom to push the board's thinking that isn't just about the business, but is related to what's happening in the world out there that they need to be aware of. And then we're holding a high standard of people participating in conversations in ways that really help the management team. We haven't tried the bulls and bears, but it's that idea that it seems to me an incredibly important part of the evolving responsibility of board members in this era, and would help with some of that distrust that you talked about at the beginning of the conversation, going I think the CEOs like Dave were living through this rapid change. You're going to feel better if the board members are on the bus with them and not standing around watching them whiz by and wondering, now we got to play catch up. And so what kind of things do you do for board director training and that sort of thing. But what kinds of things do you ask them to do? Colleen, what did the report suggest people ought to be doing?
Yeah, well, obviously a plug for NACD, particularly if you are strong in a certain area. Continuing education is important, but also make yourself uncomfortable. That was one of the big comments that we had, is not rely on the specialists in the room. If you do bring on a specialist, you still have the responsibility as a board member to fully understand what it is you're voting on. And so you can't just rely on the cybersecurity specialists in the room or AI specialists. You have to be accountable. So we talked a lot about education, having allowances up to $10,000 a year to spend on specific education. We encourage certificates. For example, I have my cyber and my AI certificate through Carnegie Mellon. Those are things that, it's interesting. Once you go through it, you have more confidence of what you know and what you don't know. And it makes you that much more valuable when, occasionally I ask to sit in a table stakes game, and not to participate as much as to see how they did it. And they forgot I was there because I was on Zoom and they were in the room. And it was fabulous to see. They did everything I could have expected them to do. And I walked away much more confident as a board member because they allowed me to witness how they process things. So education is a little bit of spending money to get formal education, a little bit of seeking out what you think you need to strengthen and what you need to continue with. And also, more importantly, getting around your peers and talking about common issues to open your brain up, because it's really hard to get at these things in a boardroom because we're busy, right? Everything's just so down to the minute. But to actually take time outside and spend your time understanding, listening, reading the books that some of our colleagues write, those things matter. So those are some thoughts.
Yeah, I think that just to add on to that, from an education perspective, we certainly encourage board members to engage with NACD. Everything that Colleen just framed and outlined. I think there is one more kind of debate and framing that we were having as a board, and I'm sure you guys are having as well. And some of that would be, hey, how much of this is opt in or opt out? And that's kind of a debate that's happening as well. And I think where we're falling is that because technology is so important to the transformation of what we're doing as a company, there's going to be some things that we're asking the directors to actually lean in on certain classes when it comes to AI and some of the generative technology that we're doing to make them just better board members there. And then, of course, there's other things that they could do on their own. So that is something that we're kind of doing. And by the way, on the Bulls and Bears, we call it red team, blue team, Colleen. So I'm glad.
Yeah, in journalism, I come out of media. So
Yeah.
I was disrupted early and often, starting in about the 80s. But we did the red teams and blue teams, arguing the editorial reasons to put something on the air. But coming back to what you were saying, Dave, the thing that really strikes me most is how the proxy might change in the future. And it wouldn't surprise me if in 5 years, the continuing education is a section in the proxy.
It's a good point.
Yeah, I think that's right. Hey, Dave, put you a little on the spot, but one of the things I really liked about the report is it named something that I feel like it hasn't been talked a lot about, which is CEO well-being. The other truism of my career is the stress of the job of the CEO, the speed of it, the 24/7 aspect of it, the just relentlessness of it, the multiple stakeholders. There've been questions in the chat about, who says what to the street and public, they're poor public figures. So how overt a discussion is you being a healthy, productive, like how do you find balance and how do you discuss that at the board? And Colin, I'd be interested in your thoughts and experience about, how you try to do it in the board situations you're in, because we need our CEOs to be around for the long haul, and these are very stressful jobs.
Yeah, I think it's a couple of different vectors there. I mean, one is your own personal vector, and for me, I kind of do this industrial athlete thing, like most people on here probably have done. I mean, you have to have whatever balance you need. For me, it's exercising in the morning and watching CNBC, or getting my mind ready in the morning as I'm doing that as a CEO. I think one thing that is underplayed is reflection time. I mean, it is not a badge of honor to me to have back-to-back meetings all day long without having some reflection time. That's super important for me to be able to do that, and just some debate time, and so getting that, and then just trying to find some time to disconnect and do some things with the family that you want to do. And it's hard to do, to be quite honest with you, because it is 24/7. It's everything that you thought it would be and more nowadays with everything going on. But that's the crown you wear, and that's what you have to deal with on doing it. The second vector would be your board. Jody does a good job with this. For a CEO, you don't realize it is a lonely job, as everyone that sat in the seat would know that. It's not like people are just calling you up and saying, "Hey, Colleen, you want a hug?" or "How things going?" I mean, it's paramount to being in a trauma room, right? Everything that comes in, it's bad.
Yeah.
You don't know how much, and then you're going to solve problems, and you keep a cool head and do all of those things. But I think when the board touches bases with you and says, "Hey, how are you doing? We want to make sure you're doing good. What are some of the things that we can help with?" That makes a big difference. I think Jody and I have a good relationship on that, on just kind of driving that. That's how I would look at it. So as directors, reach out to your CEO and just say, "Hey, how are you doing? And what are some of the things I could do to help you?" That would be one thing I'd suggest.
Yeah, I think it's always challenging to have a director call you and do that little probing, "Hey, how you doing?" It's like, what have you heard? Very concerning. I don't know too many CEOs who are, confidants with a director. It just doesn't come with the territory. I do believe that knowing they've got your back matters, which is why that stat mattered a lot to me. I do believe that trusting them and being able to say, here's how to help me be successful, or the company to be successful, is, for example, I serve on a university board, and the comment from the president of the university stood up there, and a director asked that question. And he said, "You know what would be the most helpful? Thank you for asking that," he says. "We need internships. So I'm going to ask you, can you give me 10 internships in your company?" And I'm going to go around the room. He walked out of there with like 400 internships. And the point was, it was a real specific ask. And so I think that's important to know how you can help them be successful. I know that's not necessarily on a personal level, but it builds trust and it matters. I would also argue that the best CEOs, I had this for myself, but I went through something early in my life that was very traumatic. I lost my mother when I was 4. And so almost anything that comes at me, not going to be worse than that, right? That's my mindset. I'm good. And I've witnessed other CEOs who've had some trauma that really puts things in perspective, have a really good head on their shoulders. And so if I've got a CEO who isn't thinking that way, I try to remind them that what really matters is to keep your head about you, that this is not life or death. Now, sometimes it is. I've had helicopter crashes where I lost the entire team, and it is awful and heartbreaking. But again, you keep it in perspective and you go on to pick up and you move on and you rebuild. And so those are the things that I try to keep in mind for your own mental health. And you're right about that, Dave. Working out, having what works for you matters.
Yep, 100%. The other thing I would encourage all the board members who are listening in on this is unfortunately we also live in a complicated time. So now you've just talked about a tragedy of a plane accident, but as recently as the violence in Mexico trapped a bunch of executives who couldn't get out. Or, there are these things where the being heightened awareness of executive security, particularly if they're traveling, we're just in a different world. We're making sure that you all understand with your security departments, where people are, how to get to them, how to get them out. Because that's just a reality of the world we're in. These jobs are high pressure, they're more high visibility. We're in a bit of an anti-popular, bit of a populist movement about companies. And so that's a whole nother component of keeping the CEO and their executive team safe and productive as much as we can. We've got like 3 or 4 more minutes. I think I've hit most of the questions that have gone along. So what I'd be remiss if I didn't finish with asking both of you, what are the 2 or 3 things you would say, okay, you just spent an hour and a half listening to the 3 of us talk. What should you take back to your board meeting if you're your boardroom, if you're listening to this? Like this is the thing I'd want you to remember. Maybe Colleen, you can go first.
Well, the speed of things, we're all feeling it. I'm going to plant a seed that I believe our future is going to be laced with an intelligence layer, monitoring the health of the system, the decision-making of the system in general, not much different than, monitoring earthquakes. We will have our nodes, we will have our measurement ability, and we're going to look at an organization and be measuring how the system is functioning, not the structure, because that to me is what's on paper, but how do we make decisions? Where are the friction points? How long does it take? How quick can we marshal against the competition? Board directors can come in now, and I've done it, where I didn't do anything that compromised information, but I put in give me 10 recommended directors for this spec with the name blacked out of the company. And guess what? 9 of the 10 were most commonly found on the recruiters list that they gave us to look at. So it begs the question, what role do we expect from our recruiters? Well, it isn't just giving us the names. I think we know the names. I think it's getting underneath who's the best fit, getting underneath how they're going to behave, react, build the culture, create the future. So there's a different need that we would press upon our recruiters with the advent of AI. I can keep going with all the things that AI is already preparing. And I think there's going to be an intelligence layer for the systems that we haven't really talked about or considered, but 5 years from now, we're going to consider it table stakes.
Dave, how about you?
Yeah, I think just to finish up here, I would say taken away, number one is speed and technology, as Colleen was alluding to. That's going to be, it's a part of boards, it's a part of you, whether you like it or not. The them is you, right? And as a board member, you have a responsibility to go deep, do that curiosity and that learning. That's super important. I think trust and relationships matter with management and the CEO. How you go in and structure yourself in the boardroom matters, and how you kind of drive that trust and relationship. It will benefit you, the company, the shareholders better than not. Just be aware of who you are in doing that. So think about that. We could talk about that for hours, but those are some things I'd say kind of walking away with are super important.
Yeah, well, so my 3 would be that probably more than any time in my career, the C board. This is a collaborative effort. If companies are going to be successful, given all the pressures, there's just an enormous value in the CEO and board dynamic being productive. There's healthy tensions, there's fiduciary responsibilities, got it. But if you're really going to help companies be successful, there's just too much to do to have an us versus them or the gotchas or any of the stuff that historically existed. Second one is trust in relationships is kind of the same no matter what the human beings are. It's conversations, it's getting to know each other. It's actually putting in the time to have those trusting relationships because it's a different kind of structure aboard, but it's still about human connectedness. And the third one is for any of you, the report does have at the back end a toolkit, and toolkits can be, good things or bad things. I think it's a pretty useful set of guidelines for if anything that we've talked about has prompted something in thinking about your own board. There's a good chance there's something in there that help you think about either a diagnosis or some actions you could take. This is as Colleen said, she didn't know how data driven this particular topic was going to be, and it isn't. In some ways, but that toolkit will be pretty helpful to those of you take a look. I could talk to you two all day. Pete, thank you so much, but I do have to hand back to Melody or we're going to lose everybody. So thank you both.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks to all three of you, Steve, Colleen, Dave. Very thought-provoking, interesting conversation. Really appreciate it. And quite frankly, very timely. As was mentioned a couple of times, we live in a very increasingly complex environment, and trust, clarity, strong board CEO relationships are all really critical for boards to navigate that ever-changing environment. So thank you all. On behalf of NACD Minnesota chapter, I also want to thank our partners at NACD New England chapter. It's always a joy, a pleasure to work with you. We've done these programs a couple of times, have always gotten a lot out of it. Really enjoyed working with you. And I want to thank, I know Ellen mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, a number of people who have worked very hard to put this program together. So I want to echo those thanks as well. A couple final little cleanup messages, and then we'll let you get on about your day. Really quick shout out to Jay Miller, who is a member of our Minnesota chapter, but also on the NACD National Board. I know he's been on the call with us today, so thank you for joining us. And everyone else, thank you as well. There is going to be on the screen here some upcoming events that we have. Definitely want to call your attention to those. For the New England chapter, please note the day-long program on June 4th to be held at Foley and Lardner's office in Boston. The advanced topics for experienced public company directors is the program that will be highlighted that day. It's designed exclusively for directors currently sitting on public company boards. So please check that out if you're able to do so. We also want to extend a particular invitation out to a program sponsored by Minnesota chapter on healthcare AI transformation that'll be coming up, as well as NOM and Gov board effectiveness on the 16th. It's sort of a two-part series. So really excited about a couple of those. Finally, there will be a survey that we are sharing with you. The link is in the chat. It's on the screen. It's really important to us to get your feedback. It's not only informative to us, but it helps us curate programs for all of you in the future. So please take a moment to fill that out. If you're a Minnesota or North Dakota attendee and you want CLE credit, please indicate so in the chat room. Whew, I think that's it. I think I got through all of the announcements. And finally, one more time, I just want to thank our presenters, and I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your day to attend. Great topics, very timely topics, and we look forward to seeing you all at our next event. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you.